The invitation arrived wrapped in silver paper, too elegant for the kind of family that barely remembered birthdays. My cousin Daniel was celebrating his engagement, and apparently, it was supposed to be the event of the season. That line made me laugh when I read it, because Daniel had never cared about family until there was something to show off. The venue was an old estate to ours outside the city. One of those places with chandeliers that looked like they'd collapse if you breathed too hard. I hadn't planned on going, not after what happened last year. But then my mother called, her voice soft and urgent. "Please, Leah," she said. "This is our chance to make things right." Right? As if that word ever meant anything in our family. Still, something in her tone made me say yes. I told myself it would be just one night. One meal, one fake smile, one performance. Then I'd be gone. But that was before I realized Daniel's engagement party wasn't really about love or celebration. It was about humiliation. Mine, when I arrived, the driveway was lined with luxury cars. The kind that cost more than my apartment. Daniel greeted guests near the fountain, wearing a designer suit and that same smug grin he'd had since we were kids. "Leah," he said as if my name was a joke. "Didn't think you'd make it?" I smiled politely. "Wouldn't miss it." His fiancée Ava stood beside him, all shimmering gold and perfect posture. She looked like a magazine ad come to life. "It's so nice to finally meet you," she said, her voice sugar-sweet, but her eyes cold. "Daniel's told me so much." I wondered what exactly he'd told her. That I was the family disappointment. The one who ruined his promotion. The one who saw what he did and kept quiet. The thought flickered and I pushed it down. Tonight, I wasn't here to fight old battles. I was here to end them. Inside, the ballroom was packed. Relatives I hadn't seen in years smiled like strangers. My Aunt Carol waved from a distance but didn't approach. My mother hovered by the buffet table, pretending to laugh at something my father said. Everyone played their parts, as usual. But I could feel it something unspoken humming beneath the surface, a tension that followed me like static. Then, about 30 minutes in, the first whisper reached me. "She's here," someone said behind me. "After everything?" Another voice replied. I heard she threatened to sue Daniel's firm. Turned, pretending to grab a drink, and saw two of my cousins staring before quickly looking away. That was when I knew Daniel hadn't invited me to reconcile. He wanted an audience. A setup. The speeches started just after dinner. Toasts, laughter, clinking glasses. Daniel went last, naturally. "Family means everything to me," he began, eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. "Even when we don't see eye to eye." A few people chuckled. "Some of you know Leah and I had differences. But tonight's about forgiveness." The spotlight hit me then, literally. A waiter adjusted the light, and suddenly I was illuminated like a suspect on trial. My stomach twisted. He continued, "Leah's been through a lot this year. I think it's brave she showed up after all that drama at the office." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I felt the heat rise in my face. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, Ava leaned in, smiling sweetly. "It's so inspiring that you're still working on yourself." Laughter. My mother's eyes darted toward me, pleading silently not to make a scene. I smiled. A calm, deliberate, dangerous smile. "You're right," I said. "Growth is important. Some people should try it." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he hid it behind another toast. The night went on, but something in me had already shifted. They wanted to humiliate me. They wanted to remind everyone of the scandal Daniel co-donned, blame me for surviving it. But I wasn't the same person who used to stay quiet. I had come prepared. In my clutch, next to my lipstick, was a small flash drive. On it were copies of documents, emails, and transfer receipts. Proof of what Daniel did last year. The insider trades, the stolen accounts, the reason I almost lost my job. He thought I'd buried it. He thought I'd protect him like I always did. But this time, the story would end differently. I slipped away from the ballroom after dessert, down a hallway lined with portraits of strangers. The air was cooler there, quieter. I found the study a perfect replica of an old-world office, complete with a projector and a waiting laptop. It took less than a minute to plug in the drive. My hands didn't even shake. When I returned, Daniel was preparing his final toast. The lights dimmed. The projector screen flickered to life behind him, showing the first image, a balance sheet with his name. "Tonight," he said proudly, "I want to thank everyone who supported me and Ava." The next slide appeared an email marked confidential. I watched his expression falter as the room fell silent. One more slide. Then another. Numbers, names, evidence. The crowd murmured. Daniel turned around, horror dawning on his face. "What is this?" he demanded. I took a sip of champagne, my voice calm and clear. "Just a little something to help everyone understand what forgiveness really costs." The whispers turned to gasps. My mother stood frozen. My father's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. Ava stepped back, confusion twisting into disgust. Daniel lunged toward the projector, yanking the plug. But it was too late. The damage was done. The room buzzed with chaos, guests pulling out phones, whispering, pointing. I turned and walked away, the click of my heels echoing down the marble hall like applause. For the first time in years, I felt something that almost resembled peace. Not happiness, not closure, just the calm before the next storm. Because I knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. He'd started this war in silence. I was just finishing it out loud the next morning. I woke up to my phone vibrating nonstop. Dozens of missed calls, notifications flooding in. The first message I opened was from my mother. "What did you do, Leah? Everyone's talking about it. Daniel says he'll press charges." I stared at the screen, unbothered. Of course he would. It was classic Daniel cornered, exposed, desperate to shift the blame. I'd spent years letting him rewrite stories to make himself the victim. Not this time. I scrolled past the messages, ignoring the flood of family drama. News had already spread online. Someone had recorded part of the projection. My email was full of journalists asking for comments. Even Daniel's company issued a vague statement about ongoing internal investigations. I smiled to myself. He'd made his entire career on lies. It was poetic, watching it collapse overnight. But the victory was bittersweet. Because underneath that satisfaction, there was a faint ache memories of all the years I'd protected him, believed him, wanted to see the good in him. Maybe that was my biggest mistake. I wasn't innocent either. I'd kept quiet for too long. That silence had cost me friends, jobs, and self-respect. But when I saw how easily he turned everyone against me, I realized forgiveness wasn't noble, it was dangerous. Around noon, I finally answered my mother's call. Her voice came through sharp and panicked. "Leah, what were you thinking?" "You humiliated him." The whole family saw. "You mean they finally saw what he really is?" I said flatly. "You can't just ruin your brother's life like that," she cried. "He's your cousin," I corrected. "And he ruined his own life." There was a long pause. Then, softer, "You've always been so angry." I laughed bitterly. "Angry, Mom. He nearly destroyed me last year. He leaked my files, blamed me for insider trading, and you all pretended not to see it." "That's not true," she whispered, but her voice broke halfway through. "We just didn't know what to do." "You knew enough," I said quietly. "You chose him." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was her uneven breathing. Then she said, "Please, Leah, just come home. We can fix this." "No," I replied. "I'm done fixing things I didn't break." I hung up. That was the last time I spoke to her that week. By evening, the engagement party scandal had gone viral. The video recorded by someone's phone was everywhere. Daniel's face mid-speech, the slides behind him flashing one damning email after another. It had over 100,000 views in less than a day. My inbox filled with offers from news outlets, lawyers, even whistleblower advocates. But I didn't want fame or credit. I wanted closure. The next few days were chaos. Reporters camped outside my apartment. My manager called, telling me to lay low until the noise settled. I barely slept. Each night, I'd replay that moment at the party, the way the crowd turned. The look in Daniel's eyes when he realized he couldn't talk his way out of it. There was satisfaction in remembering it, but also fear, because people like Daniel didn't go down quietly. On the fourth night, I noticed a car parked across the street. It had been there before, once in the morning, once after sunset. Dark windows, engine off, but the driver never left. My chest tightened. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was being paranoid. But then, 2 days later, my doorbell rang. When I looked through the peephole, there was no one. There just a plain envelope on the floor. Inside was a photograph. It was me walking into my apartment that morning. The picture was taken from across the street. On the back, a message written in neat black ink. "You think this is over?" My hands trembled. It wasn't Daniel's handwriting. It was cleaner, colder. Someone else was involved. Someone protecting him more, worse, using him. My mind raced through possibilities. His fiancée. His business partners. He had powerful friends, the kind who didn't like scandals. I spent the night double-locking every door, every window. Sleep was impossible. By dawn, I decided to fight back properly this time. I copied everything I had, emails, recordings, the original driven, sent them to multiple lawyers, reporters, and one contact at the Financial Crimes Division. If anything happened to me, they'd know where to start. Around a.m., my phone rang. No caller ID. I hesitated, then answered. A familiar voice spoke softly, almost amused. "You made quite the mess, Leah." My blood ran cold. "Daniel." A chuckle. "No, but he's not doing well." "You really hurt him." "Good," I said. "He deserved it." The voice sighed. "See, that's your problem. You never understood the bigger picture. This wasn't supposed to get public. Who is this?" I demanded. "Think of me as someone cleaning up your mistakes," the man replied. "If I were you, I'd start packing." The call ended before I could respond. I stood, frozen, heart pounding. Whoever that was, they weren't bluffing. My mind snapped into survival mode. I grabbed my bag, laptop, the second drive, and headed straight for my car. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I caught a glimpse of the same dark vehicle from before, still parked on the opposite curb. This time, its headlights flicked on. I pressed harder on the gas. My phone buzzed again, a new message from an unknown number. "You can run, Leah, but we'll always find you." I didn't know who he was, but I knew I wasn't going to stop running until I turned the game back on them. Revenge was no longer a plan. It was survival. I drove 4 hours without a clear destination. It's just a need to get away from the city and every shadow that seemed to follow me. The highway stretched endlessly under a pale sky, and every car in my rear view felt like a threat. My hands clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The message still echoed in my mind. "You can run, Leah, but we'll always find you." I replayed the voice call, the low, steady tone, the strange calmness. Whoever he wasn't acting on Daniel's behalf out of loyalty. He sounded like someone protecting a larger secret. I stopped at a gas station near the edge of a small coastal town. The air smelled like salt and rust, the kind of place where people didn't ask questions. I paid in cash for fuel, coffee, and a prepaid SIM card. As I waited for the pump to stop, my phone buzzed again, a known number, same pattern as before. I powered it off and threw it into a nearby dumpster. Then I replaced it with a new one. Within minutes, I had a new number. New start. At least that's what I told myself. I booked a room at a rundown motel near the cliffs. The kind with flickering neon signs and thin walls that made it impossible to forget you weren't alone. I sat on the bed, scrolling through my new phone, checking news updates. Daniel's name was everywhere. Corporate scandal deepens. Engagement party leaks trigger investigation. He hadn't been arrested yet, but he was suspended. The firm was collapsing under scrutiny. It should have felt like justice, but something about it didn't sit right. If Daniel was being destroyed, why was someone threatening me to stop? Unless the person behind the threats wasn't protecting Daniel? They were protecting themselves. I opened my laptop and logged into an encrypted email I'd set up long ago. There were already 3 new messages. The first was from an anonymous account. "We warned you." The second was a forwarded article about another executive at Daniel's firm, his mentor, a man named Harold Reeves who had suddenly resigned. The third one chilled me the most. It was a single photograph, me, standing at the gas station earlier that day. The timestamp was from 20 minutes ago. My chest tightened. They knew exactly where I was. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and turned off the lights. For hours, I sat in silence, waiting for something to happen. Every sound outside made me flinch: the creak of pipes, the hum of cars passing by. Around midnight, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, right outside my room. I held my breath, gripping the small knife I'd bought earlier. A shadow passed across the thin strip of light beneath the door. Then, silence. 10 minutes later, a soft knock. 3 taps. I didn't move. Another knock, harder this time. "Leah," a voice whispered. My heart jumped. It was my mother's voice. "Mom." I whispered back, frozen in disbelief. "Open the door, honey, please." My pulse roared in my ears. It couldn't be her. She didn't know where I was. "How did you find me?" I asked. "Please, Leah, let me in." "It's not safe." The words were right, but her tone was wrong. Too calm, too measured. My mother was many things, but calm under pressure wasn't one of them. I stayed still. Another voice came from behind her mail, unfamiliar. "Step back, Mrs. Carter." A brief scuffle, then silence again. My body trembled. I crouched by the door, listening. Then the knock returned, firmer this time. "Miss Carter," the same man said. "We're with the Financial Crimes Division. You need to come with us." Relief and suspicion collided in my chest. Maybe it was real. Maybe they'd traced my reports. "Show me your badge," I called. A pause. Then a laminated ID slipped under the door. It looked official enough: seal, name, photo, but the edges were wrong, too glossy. Fake. My fear turned to certainty. I backed away from the door. "Leave," I said, voice trembling but steady. "Or I call the police." The silence stretched. Then the man laughed softly. "Oh, Leah, we are the police." My throat went dry. The doorknob rattled once, then again. I darted toward the window and shoved it open. The salty night air hit me in the face as I climbed out. The second my feet hit the gravel, headlights flared in the parking lot. A black SUV, the same one from my street. I bolted toward the cliffs, heart hammering, shoes slipping on the uneven ground. The wind whipped through my hair, the waves crashing below. Behind me, I heard shouting, footsteps, the crunch of gravel. "Stop," someone yelled. I kept running until I reached the edge of the cliff. Below, the ocean roared, dark, bottomless, deadly. I turned to face the voices approaching. 2 figures emerged from the shadows, their faces half hidden. One of them lifted a flashlight, the beam blinding me. "You don't want to do this," the man said. "You have no idea what you've started." "Then tell me," I shouted over the wind. He hesitated. "It's bigger than Daniel. Much bigger. Walk away and you'll live." I laughed bitterly. "You think I came this far just to walk away?" I reached into my jacket and held up a small flash drive. "This isn't the only copy." The man froze. "What did you do?" "I sent everything," I said. "Emails, accounts, names. If anything happens to me, it goes public." For a moment, no one moved. Then he lowered the flashlight, his expression shifting from anger to something almost like respect. "You're smarter than I thought," he said. "We'll be in touch." They turned and disappeared into the darkness, their SUV's engine fading into the night. I stood there for a long time, staring at the waves crashing below, the wind cold against my skin. For the first time, I felt something like victory, but it was hollow, fragile. Because I knew this wasn't over. They hadn't come to kill me. Not yet. They'd come to warn me. And that meant the real danger was still waiting somewhere in the shadows. I didn't sleep that night. The ocean crashed below like a heartbeat I couldn't silence, and every gust of wind against the motel walls made me flinch. By dawn, I'd packed my things and was already driving inland. The flash drive sat on the passenger seat, its metal casing cold against the light. My entire life, every message, every file, every secret I'd uncovered fit inside that tiny object. I drove aimlessly for hours until I found a diner off the highway. It's the kind that smelled like burnt coffee and old regrets. I ordered pancakes I didn't touch and kept my eyes on the reflection in the window. Two men in suits entered 15 minutes later. Not police. Not FBI. Just wrong enough to make my skin crawl. I slid out the back door quietly and drove away before they even placed their order. They were close. Too close. I stopped at a library in the next town over, logged into one of the public computers, and used an encrypted VPN to access the backup server I'd set up before everything fell apart. I uploaded the files again this time, sending them to 3 major Sikh journalists and 1 international watchdog group under a pseudonym. No more waiting. No more warnings. I hit send and whispered, "Now it's your turn." 2 hours later, the first headline broke. Whistleblower leak exposes. It's multi-million-dollar fraud network tied to corporate and government accounts. Daniel's name was mentioned. Yes, but so were half a dozen others. Reeves, multiple board members, even a state official. It was a web, and I'd torn a hole through it. My inbox filled instantly, journalists asking for statements, anonymous threats, a few messages from friends begging to know if it was true. I didn't answer any of them. I just kept driving, each mile putting more distance between me and the life I used to live. But as the hours passed, something strange happened. Instead of fear, I felt clarity. Power even. For years, I'd been the quiet one, the fixer, the person who cleaned up everyone else's mess. Now I was the one holding the match. By nightfall, I'd reached a small town on the edge of nowhere. I rented a short-term cabin under a fake name and parked the car out of sight. For the first time in weeks, I felt safe enough to breathe. I turned on the radio, hoping for noise, but the broadcast stopped me cold. Sources close to the ongoing investigation confirm that. Multiple individuals are now in custody following the release of confidential corporate documents earlier today. Daniel's name came first, then Harold Reeves, then 3 others, arrested, indicted. The network was crumbling faster than I expected. I let out a slow breath, equal parts relief and disbelief. I thought it was over. I was wrong. Because 10 minutes later, my burner phone rang. No caller ID. Just a familiar static-laced voice. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" I froze. "Who is this?" I demanded. A low chuckle. "You think you exposed them all? But you only peeled the first layer. Then who are you?" I asked. "Someone who knows what comes next," the voice replied. "And if you want to survive it, Leah, you'll need to choose a side." Click. The line went dead. My stomach twisted. The man from the motel. The one who'd told me to walk away. He wasn't threatening me. He was warning me again. The deeper truth wasn't in the files I'd leaked. It was what those files led to. Offshore accounts, political donations, shell companies. There was still something bigger, something untouched. And I had just made myself the most dangerous person alive to them all. That night, I sat by the cabin window watching the tree line fade into black. Every instinct screamed to run again, but something inside me hardened instead. I'd lived my whole life cleaning up other people's damage. I wasn't going to run from mine. Not anymore. The next morning, I drove to a nearby post office and sent an untraceable letter, one final move before disappearing completely. It was addressed to the lead journalist covering the story. Inside, a single sentence written in black ink. "Follow the money beyond the company. Start with Reeves International." That was the last thread I could pull. Whatever they did with it would either destroy them all or drag me back into the fire. A week later, I saw the follow-up report. Massive, explosive, international laundering. Political corruption. Decades of cover-ups. It was everything. And tucked deep in the article. One small line made me smile. An anonymous source known only as LC provided key documentation that initiated the exposure. I didn't need fame or recognition. That single line was enough. It was proof that for once I hadn't been silenced. I spent the next few months rebuilding from the ground up. New identity. New apartment. I learned to enjoy quiet mornings, cooking for myself, taking walks without checking over my shoulder. But sometimes, late at night, still hear the ocean in my dreams, the sound of the waves crashing against the cliffs where I made the choice to fight back. People like Daniel and Reeves built their empires on the backs of people who stayed quiet. People like me. But they forgot that even the quiet ones can burn everything down if pushed too far. One evening, while watching the sunset through my cabin window, a small envelope slid under my door. No return address. Inside was a single photo. Me standing at the edge of the same cliff where it all began. On the back, one handwritten line. Nice work. You're not done yet. I stared at it for a long time, the orange light spilling across the table. I should have felt fear, but I didn't. I felt something sharper purpose. Maybe this wasn't the end of my story. Maybe it was just the beginning of someone else's downfall. And if it was, I was ready.